Sinusoids with a track called Hot Pants. It's now at 9:35 here on the Kiwi this morning.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Kiwi.
Joining me now in the Kiwi studio is a very well respected music critic and writer and reviewer, Nick Bollinger. Hello to you, Nick. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have you in. A brand new book is out. It's out just now, called 100 Essential New Zealand Albums. Long time in the making, this one?
Yeah.
A century of music almost?
Well, yeah, 50 years at least, the history of the long playing record.
Yeah. It almost looks like without even opening it, it's kind of like the Lonely Planet of New Zealand albums.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's a handy guide,
Yeah.
I guess is the way of looking at it.
Yeah. How did you go about selecting the albums?
Well, first you had to work out what your actual catchment was,
Like criteria.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. That's the starting point. And I guess I had to start by narrowing the field and going, okay, worthy as they may be, Douglas Lilburn's symphonies just aren't part of the brief for this.
Right.
Kirita Kanua, I'm not even going there, you know. So it's pop music in the broadest sense. I thought that's manageable.
Yeah.
I can whittle it down to pop music. That can include everything from, the first entry in the book, which is a Maori family from Otaki who went to Sydney in 1930 to record sort of parlour ballads. They did things like Happy Days Are Here Again. The Tahiwis, they're called.
Yeah.
So, they're pop music, you could say, in the earliest sort of form that I could find, right up to, Smash Proof and Ed Cake are probably the most recent things in the book.
Yeah, and you would have written about a lot of these albums in the past as well, as you were reviewing them. So you kind of had the basis of the work and your thoughts on these albums already there?
That was certainly helpful, yeah. I would say maybe a quarter of them I've written about at some stage in the past, and I could revisit what I'd written and use that as the basis.
How big was your long list?
My long short list was twice as long.
Yeah.
Really was. And, I have to confess, sometimes I pick the book up myself and go, what? He's left out, no Waratahs, no...
Who is this guy, Nick Bollinger? Yeah.
Everyone's going to say that, and I say it myself. And 100, when you get down to it, is actually quite a small number, when you... Yeah.
Because often as a reviewer, you're asked to come up with your top 5 or 10 albums.
Yeah.
Is that easier or harder than 100 albums?
That's a good question. 100 was hard enough. So, people have said, well, out of this 100, what are your top 5? And I can't do that because it's like comparing apples and oranges. How do you compare Smash Proof with the Tahiwis or, Dinah Lee's Do the Blue Beat with Golden Horse? These things that they're from different eras. They represent the best of what was there at that moment.
Yeah.
And it just gets too vast. That was the other thing. I suppose if you're talking about your top 5, you're really getting down to personal tastes. I tried with the 100 to be a bit objective, there's certainly some personal favourites there.
So personal favourites, but as you say, it is kind of like the Lonely Planet guide of New Zealand albums.
It's doing both things,
Yeah.
Sure, there's a subjective element to it, but I have tried to stand back and say, what are the landmarks? What are the things that stand out, that are undeniably special?
Yeah.
Whether they're records that I personally put on the turntable every day or not,
Did it matter what kind of commercial success some of these albums had had?
No, I tried to leave that out. In fact, there will certainly be records in there where most readers go, what? Never heard of them. And that was partly the intention. I want to shine a light on some of these things I think have been overlooked that were actually really good and weren't acknowledged in their day. And
also across the various genres as well. As you say, like there was a broad sort of criteria of being pop, but there is hip-hop in there.
Yeah, absolutely. In a sense, it's the criteria is, anything that Kiwi FM would play,
Yeah.
It's pop music in the broader sense. That certainly includes hip hop. It includes some, hard rock. It tended to be the really refined genres that fell away. You won't find something that's a pure 100% country album in there, or a pure jazz album. You'll find things that are hybrids. I tended to find that the most successful pop music usually is a bit of a mixture of things, as far as New Zealand music goes, anyway.
Yeah. The difficulty, I'd imagine, because you'd say that some of these artists would be like cornerstone artists, but their repertoire and what they have is so broad.
Yeah.
They're actually whittling it down to a specific album.
Yeah.
Would be pretty hard. I mean, like you got the Clean in here.
Yeah.
Unknown Country.
I know, and some people would argue with that as a choice, because that's quite an obscure Clean album. I mean, for me, the Clean, actually, their greatest works are those EPs, like Boodle, Boodle, Boodle. A lot of the early Flying Nun bands didn't make albums at all, and possibly Flying Nun is underrepresented in the book because of that. The album thing did mean that you ended up, someone who made a great single or a great EP perhaps doesn't get acknowledged.
Yeah.
I think the Clean did make some great albums as well, and that's why Unknown Country is in there. But
yeah. She Hard is also in there with the General Electric.
Yeah.
I noticed no pacifier.
Yeah. Well, I don't think too many people would argue with me about that. But there's still, people have disputed that selection. To me, that's, I mean, there were actually 3 or 4 worthy contenders for the She Hard album to go in there, and I had to boil it down to one. And quite often I'd use that one record I wrote about, I did the same with the Phoenix Foundation, for instance, as an opportunity to write a little bit about their other works as well, and to acknowledge that, the whole body of work is interesting, but this is the one where it crystallised.
Yeah. And I noticed, some of these albums are the later, later albums of some of these artists, like Salmonella Dub there, inside the dub plates.
Yep.
So you don't necessarily subscribe to the, I like your old stuff better than your new stuff.
Try not to, although, I mean, there are examples. The Gordons album is in there rather than Bail to Space. Now, you might argue that as Bail to Space they became more and more refined and produced an even better example of that extraordinary thing they do. But I couldn't deny that starting point as being, one of those moments.
Because I'm a huge Bail to Space fan, and a lot of people will come up to me and say, no, the Gordons. I always say, you're just trying to be cool to say the Gordons, that you were around for the Gordons. I wasn't necessarily, I was alive, but I wasn't aware of the Gordons.
And that Gordons album is kind of rough, in a way, compared to what happened later as Bail to Space. But it's certainly one of those seismic events.
Yeah.
Well,
with this book, I suppose you can also get a good picture of obviously of the journey that New Zealand artists have taken and New Zealand music as a whole. How are we at the moment? I mean, is this the best time ever for New Zealand music?
It's interesting. It's the most prolific time because I think recording is cheap. I mean, if you go back to the 70s and 80s, there were very few albums actually made in New Zealand because most bands couldn't afford it. And because you had to go into a commercial studio in those days, you basically had to have a record company supporting you. No one could afford to pay those rates themselves. These days, you could literally set up a studio in your bedroom and self-publish the whole thing. So there's so much more stuff. There aren't so many filters anymore, which is a tricky thing. I mean, it's something like Kiwi FM is a filter, because you'll playlist things and you'll choose things and say, hey, this is the best that this band has to offer.
It's almost like curating, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the role that record companies used to play. And with the rise of indies, in a way, that's broken down, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, just looking at some of the later ones in the book, like Dudley Benson with The Awakening. I mean, that was a true, original product.
Yeah, that's a true independent release.
Yeah.
He's a one-man record label, and I don't think he had an A&R person saying, record these songs, Dudley, leave those ones. But somehow he curated his own work well. That's quite a rarity, I have to say.
Yeah.
I think it's usually better if somebody has a producer or an A&R person or someone to give a kind of objective voice.
And more so now than ever, we're seeing projects like Pie Warmer or Lawrence Arabia. Is Lawrence Arabia in here? That would have been
Lawrence was on the cusp.
Yeah.
He's number 101.
Yeah. That would have been a hard one to leave out. But these are projects that have not been invested in by large record companies and corporations.
Yeah.
They really are coming from almost the bedroom. Aren't they?
Yeah. That's right. And you'll find those sort of things scattered through. That is one of the things that makes New Zealand music special, I think. Some of the most fresh and interesting ideas do come from very independent people, people who haven't got a lot of, they're not working with the kind of budgets that, Michael Jackson had.
Well, I tell you what, it is a special web book. It's beautifully presented as well. It's called 100 Essential New Zealand Albums. You'll be able to find it in bookstores and I imagine record stores as well.
Should be, yeah.
Yeah. Nick Bollinger, so nice to talk to you once again and have you in the Kiwi studio.
Thanks for having us.
Catch you next time.